Hey, welcome back to the Adventure Writer channel. I should probably start this video by making something clear. Part of my job as a full-time writer, yes, I write full-time. I do editing as well, and also ghostwrite. And I work with traditionally published authors as well as indie authors. So I've seen what makes a book work and what makes it collapse across both sides of the industry. And here's what might surprise a lot of you who watch this channel. The standards are the same. Whether you're trying to pitch to an agent, or you're going to upload straight to KDP or D2D, the fundamentals do not change. The story still has to make sense. The characters still have to matter. The prose still has to be worth reading. Now, the trad pub doesn't give you a pass for being boring or weird, and indie doesn't give you a pass for being incoherent. The difference is when you go indie, no one's going to stop you. And that means that you have to be the one to stop yourself sometimes. And you have to ask some hard questions. Is this a book? Is it a story? Or is it therapy with a plot stapled onto the top? And somewhere along the way, a lot of indie writers get the wrong idea. They heard, you don't need a publisher, and then it translated to, you don't need standards. And I'm going to say this as nicely as I can. Being an indie author does not mean that you get to write unreadable, self-indulgent nonsense and then act shocked or hurt when nobody wants to read it. All right? It doesn't mean writing your weird, barely edited therapy fantasy, slapping a cover on it, and then calling it a novel. Indie publishing was never about that. The whole point of being an indie is that you get to bypass the gatekeepers. You get to skip the approval process, and you get to stop asking permission to tell your stories. That doesn't mean the reader disappears. And it doesn't mean that you should stop caring about quality, structure, and about whether anyone can follow what the hell you just wrote. Indie publishing gives you freedom, but it does not give you an excuse. Writing something personal is fine. Writing something raw is fine. Because most good books come from a place of truth. I think we can all admit that here. But the difference is you're still writing for a reader. Unless you just don't want someone to read it, then there's no reason to publish it to begin with. And you have to shape any truths that you tell into a story. You have to give it structure, a rhythm. And you do the hard work of turning raw emotion into something that people want to read. What you don't do is you dump your diary onto 300 pages and then you call it brave. Readers do not owe you emotional validation. They're not your therapist, and they're not your workshop group. They're picking up your book, hoping for a story, not to be trapped in your unfiltered spiral. Yeah, you are allowed to write whatever you want, but don't complain about being ignored if what you wrote isn't good or isn't readable. That's not oppression. It's the consequence of putting the book with no narrative spine and no editorial control and no sense of audience on the market. Being an indie doesn't protect you from that. It just makes it more obvious. And this is why so many indie authors don't get taken seriously. The whole point isn't to write what you want and call it good just because nobody stopped you. The point is to create. And when people say, write what you want, they don't mean write like no one's ever going to read it. They mean write something you believe in. When I started my fiction series, I wrote stories that I wished existed more in the mainstream. And people like them. People enjoy them. I keep getting little video reviews and comments and more sales coming in because I wrote stories. I didn't write a personal fantasy therapeutic release session and then put a cover on it. And here's the thing. When you're the writer, you're also the editor. Sometimes you can hire an editor. You're the publisher, unless you do one of those hybrid scam publishing houses where you have to pay to be published. And you're also the marketer. You got to wear every hat. So if the book flops, it's on you. It's not on the market. It's not on the readers. And it's not on some invisible, oppressive machine that just doesn't get your vision. If you want freedom, great. But freedom means responsibility. And no, I'm not quoting Spider-Man here. But part of that responsibility is making sure your book isn't a mess. You still have to respect the reader. It still has to be worth reading. It's not your emotional trauma that you dressed up in metaphors. And at the end of the day, if you're publishing something, whether you're publishing traditionally or being an indie publisher, you're trying to sell it. And if you're trying to sell it, that means it has to be marketable. And I know a bunch of indie writers out there are going to clutch their pearls and cry because I said marketable. It makes them flinch and they think, well, you're a sellout or chasing trends. No, it doesn't. It just means that marketable means that someone other than you is going to want to read it. It doesn't mean that you've sold out to the man. It means the story has shape. It means you didn't write a fever dream about childhood trauma with no plot or sense of who it's for and then blame the algorithm when no one wants to buy it. Writing is personal, sure. That's what journals are for. That's what blogs are for, unless you want other people to read them. But publishing is professional. And that means, even as an indie writer, you have to publish something that people want to read if you want to be an indie author. If you want to write weird fiction, fine. Just make it good weird. Make it clear enough and strong enough and crafted enough that someone else wants to follow it. Being an indie is a privilege that anybody can take advantage of. You don't have to wait for the approval of a publishing house. You don't have to wait for an agent to say, hey, let's sell this thing. And you don't need to pitch your soul in a query letter hoping and praying that someone gives you the shot. But you still don't get to skip the work. If you want to be taken seriously, write something serious. Not serious in tone, but serious in intent. Something that's built. Otherwise, don't waste your time calling it a book. Call it what it is. It's a journal entry that you uploaded. And don't be surprised when no one else read it. I can't tell you how many times I've had to sit with an aspiring writer and have the hard conversation. No one is going to read this. I don't care how many times I edit it or change the prose. No one's going to read this because why would they? This is garbage. You can't bring me a book and say, I wrote this and I want to sell it so people can hear my story. And then I read it and it's nothing more than a therapeutic fantasy where you've created this weird universe inside your head so that you get to win against the bullies in high school. No one's going to buy that book unless there's a really good story that goes along with it. But the story still has to be relatable, not I sit and I wear a cat uniform in my bedroom all day and my dad laughed at me, but then I got superpowers from a dog and whatever weird random thing that you decided to put out and call it a story. If you're an indie writer, if you're an indie author and you want other people to read it, this is not a game. This is not an excuse to throw garbage out on the market and then pretend like no one else gets your brilliance or the world just isn't ready. The hard truth is you weren't ready. You should have written all that down, set it on fire, did some deep breathing, took a couple of antidepressants, and then sat down and came up with a good story. All right? I know it sounds mean, but I see this hundreds of times a week with people bringing me books that they wrote because they felt like their story needed to be told. Well, just like every thought doesn't need to be said out loud, not every book needs to be written. And if you have a protagonist which is just you, not lame, and you've created this self-indulgent fan fiction of your own life, you can't get mad and blame the market when no one wants to read it. Okay? That's all I'm going to say in this video, because I've probably upset some people, and there's probably a lot of you out there going, oh, thank you for saying it. But being an indie writer doesn't mean being amateur. If you want to be an author, indie or trad, you take the writing seriously. You take the storytelling seriously. And you write something people want to read. It doesn't have to be something everyone wants to read. But it has to be something readable. And if you want other people to read it, that means you got to work and not hit your fever dreams. All right? That's all for this one. I'll wrap it up, and I'll see you guys on the next one.